Good afternoon. I'm Hari Osofsky, Dean of Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, and I am thrilled to welcome all of you to our 2024 Knox Conversations. This is our second time hosting the Knox Conversations, which were established to create space for an open exchange of ideas, public debate, and respectful discourse on matters of importance to the legal and law school community. We are so honored today to have an extraordinary bipartisan panel to dialogue on a topic that really could not be more timely and important, America 2024 and a Political Reckoning. Our panel includes Paul Begala, political commentator, professor of public policy, author, and political strategist; Michael Steele, political commentator, communicator, author, and the first African American to hold the office of both Lieutenant Governor of Maryland and chair of the Republican National Committee; and our moderator, Northwestern professor Jason DeSanto. We are also grateful that so many members of our Northwestern community are able to join us both in person and online for this important conversation. Today's conversation was organized by a wonderful team at our law school. Could you please join me in thanking Professors Michael Kang and Jason DeSanto, the entire Alumni Relations and Development team, especially Associate Dean Darnell Hines and Senior Associate Director Adam Nordmark, Bobby Dunlap from the Northwestern University Alumni Relations and Development in Evanston, the law school's event planner, Sebastian Bujak, and the facilities team, and a big thank you to Freddy's for providing the lunches that will be distributed after the program. Can you please join me in giving a big thank you? So, everyone in this room is all too aware that we live in challenging times in which our society is deeply polarized. With less than 3 weeks until Election Day, today's topic could not be more timely and important. Now more than ever, universities and their law schools have an important role to play in fostering constructive dialogue about the major issues facing our society and legal system. A crucial part of being an effective lawyer or legal professional is being able to understand different viewpoints and arguments and advocate effectively. And so we look forward to the perspectives that today's panel will bring. Our guest speakers are two of the United States' most incisive political thinkers and bring to their commentary a wealth of experience as both practitioners and lawyers. Taken together and from across the political divide, Paul Begala and Michael Steele have steered successful U.S. presidential campaigns, served as national chair of one of our nation's major political parties, spent long days in the West Wing, won statewide office, and vigorously participated in this country's dizzying media environment. We are just so grateful to have them share their insights with our community today, just ahead of this consequential election. And from the little preview I just got, I know they have incredible insights to share. But my job is to introduce the moderator for today's discussion, Northwestern professor DeSanto, a senior lecturer teaching in the areas of law and public persuasion, public constitutional debate, and the First Amendment. He has served as a political debate strategist for Senators Mark Kelly and Dick Durbin, as well as U.S. Representative Lauren Underwood. Professor DeSanto has also provided expert commentary on political speech writing and debates for the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Hill, and Vanity Fair, and was the lead real-time commentator on professional and presidential rhetoric for the award-winning PBS program Chicago Tonight. And I have to say, as dean, I have just been so grateful for us to be able to learn from his insights, to have somebody of his expertise serving as moderator in this setting, and really for his leadership in helping us bring together such important conversations. So, Professor DeSanto, thank you, and I'm going to turn the conversation over to you.
Thank you so much, Hari. That was way too kind. I want to thank everybody for being here today and thank all of the folks who are watching us virtually as well. Hari mentioned a little bit about our fantastic panel. I'm going to go just a little bit deeper because I think it's important to understand where they're coming from as we listen to them today. Paul Begala is a national treasure. He was a chief strategist.
National treasure?
Bold.
Does that actually say that in there?
Steele.
Jason.
Steele.
Way to set the bar, man. How about just moderately competent? That's what I'm shooting for.
National treasure.
Michael, you're upset, but there's a good thing. It says Michael Steele is a guy. That's what I have. It's going to be better.
I'm a guy.
It's going to be better than that. Begala was the chief strategist for the historic 1992 Clinton-Gore campaign. He then served as a counselor to President Clinton in the White House. That's where he coordinated politics, policy, and communications. He later served as a senior advisor to Priorities USA, which was instrumental in re-electing President Obama, and he's worked on campaigns all around the world. He is currently a CNN commentator, the author of 6 books, and a scholar with the University of Virginia Center for Politics. He earned his undergraduate and law degrees from the University of Texas and previously taught in the law school at the University of Georgia. Paul wants you to know that just because he's from Texas doesn't mean he doesn't care about the rest of the country. Please join me in welcoming Paul Begala.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, Michael Steele is a pioneer. He was the first, as Hari said, African-American chairman in the history of the Republican National Committee, elected in 2009, and he served with great distinction. During his time there, the RNC broke fundraising records. More to the point, the Republicans won 63 House seats in the 2010 election under his leadership. That was the largest pickup for them in 70 years and the greatest share of legislative states in the states in 80 years under his time there. Prior to that highly successful tour of duty, he served as lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, the first African-American elected to statewide office in the Terrapin State. And showing that life is filled with surprises, Michael is currently an analyst and host on MSNBC. We got some feedback.
That was the devil. Boom.
That was it, right? It was like, what?
Where every weekend he hosts a show called The Weekend.
It was original. It was just,
He also hosts the Michael Steele podcast and earned his law degree from Georgetown. Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thank you.
So, as Hari foreshadowed, our goal today is to gain some perspectives and hopefully perspective, not simply on the 2024 election, but on the state of our politics more generally. Today's program has been styled as the possibility of a reckoning. And by that we mean a kind of accountability, the coming together, a bill to be paid for choices or situations from the past, but also perhaps the opportunity to be accountable as citizens of this country. So we're going to talk a little bit about what plagues us, but also where there are possibilities. And I'm excited to do that tonight. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for being here to do that. All right, so in thinking about today's panel and both of you, one thing that becomes very clear in learning about both of you is how much you love this country and how much you love our public life. And so I think it would be useful and engaging for folks to hear at the beginning the first time that you got interested in politics, each of you, and the moment you knew you wanted to dedicate a fair part of your life to it. And we'll start with you, Michael.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here at Northwestern and at Pritzker. And Dean, thank you for the wonderful opportunity to be here amongst colleagues and students and friends of the university. So my journey into politics is really different from most folks. I've styled myself as an accidental politician, accidental political figure, because this was not where I intended to go. I grew up in Washington, D.C. at a time that the city was still coming from underneath Jim Crow laws, and my mom having to raise me after my dad died when I was about 4 or 5 for a period alone, and then she remarried. So there's all of this stuff going on, and in the course of that, my mother just instilled in me this sense of purpose from a very young age, that I had a purpose, and that purpose was oriented through service. And so for me, from when I was in the third grade, I wanted to be a priest. And that was how I would actualize my service. And so my life was on that course, that trajectory. And as I got older, I went through Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. And in high school, I fell in love with St. Augustine and the Augustinian order, and decided I wanted to be an Augustinian. And instead of taking that track, an Augustinian and other priest friends said, no, go to college, experience the world, because then you know what the sacrifices are you have to make. And so this sense of sacrifice and service began to become linked for me at an early age in my life. So I went to Johns Hopkins, studied, I went in as a pre-med biology student. That did not work out too well. And after my sophomore year, decided, you know what, grades do matter, and I need to get them up. And so I switched out of pre-med into international relations. And I fell in love with the global space and, of course, the Catholic Church kind of being in part of that universe. It all kind of aligned with the idea of eventually becoming a church diplomat. And so when I left Hopkins, graduated Hopkins, I went into the Augustinian order and studied for the priesthood for about 3 years, and left shortly before it was time to take my simple vows. And the reason I left was this struggle over service. How do I serve God's people and my community? And I remember asking myself in a prayerful moment, okay, so you want me to do this in a business suit or a religious habit? You got to let me know, because I got to work this out. And I did. And I decided that my service could be better met in the public, but didn't really know how that was. So I come back home and to Washington, D.C., and settled down. And the law has always kind of been in the background. And I decided, well, maybe because I wanted to, maybe find a link of service. How do I serve as a lawyer? I mean, a lawyer, the tradition look at a lawyer as like, okay, most lawyers are in court. And, so I had to really begin to understand how I could take that part of my life, that career, if you will, and put it into play. And I did. I worked through that, went to Georgetown Law, and really found a space in which I could level up my service to my community through the legal profession, and that I didn't want to be a partner in all of that stuff, but for me it was much more, how do I stay in the public space, and how do I make use of and take advantage of this training and these skill sets in the service of others. And politics kind of came into place at the same time, and wound up getting involved in politics and starting out, as a lot of lawyers do in politics, being asked a legal question, which I knew nothing about, and I had to go research it. But it all kind of married up for me, and eventually was asked to run for office, which I was not a plan to do, and asked to serve as chairman, which I wasn't planning on doing that either. But those steps along the way of connecting service and the commitments and the obligations and the sacrifices that go with that really kind of animated everything that I would do later on when asked to serve in these various roles, run that gauntlet, win that campaign, provide the work that's needed in order to achieve the goal. So it was always kind of that in the background. It was always that little kid who wanted to be a priest. Still trying to figure out, how do I utilize this as service?
And you see why I love this guy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
No,
and your dean. Thank you. I told her this, I should tell you all. I just had like 15-minute conversation with your dean and learned more than I had learned in years. So I'm sorry I'm an old man. I'm going to lecture the kids. I hope you realize you're supposed to say privilege today. We're both religious. I'm a Catholic as well. I consider myself blessed. But I hope you think so too, because you have access to some of the really most brilliant and talented educators that you could be around with, and your peers and colleagues. So I'm really, really glad you're here globally at the law school, but here for this talk. I'm terribly grateful. I love that in America, this guy grows up a black kid in D.C., 95% Democrat, and became a Republican.
Yeah.
Okay,
Crazy.
I grew up in Sugar Land, Texas. Okay, which back in the day, ooh, man, our congressman was Tom DeLay. Before that, he was our pest control guy.
Yeah, he was.
Tom got into politics because the big bad federal government banned DDT, which is why we have bald eagles in all 50 states. Okay, and maybe a few more cockroaches at my mama's house. Okay. So my parents were not political at all. My father was a salesman. My mother was a homemaker, then became a secretary. So I'm not sure where it came from, but I kind of got the bug and was in student council in high school, was a student body president, went to college, University of Texas, wound up becoming a student body president. That was really formative for me because, as students will do, the students, in fact, is Gary Beck here? Somebody told me Gary Beck is going to be here. He's a buddy of mine from college. I guess not. So a bunch of us were kind of activist students. But the students who'd come before us 5 years before had abolished student government. Why? Well, it's just a bunch of resume padders, a bunch of future politicos. Well, here's what happened. Power abhors a vacuum. This is 40 years ago. Student fees back then were $7 million a year, and the university president, who has passed on now but was a colossal jerk, spent that money with no student input.
Yeah.
Okay, so taxation without representation. So a bunch of us got together and we had a referendum and we restarted student government so we could control our own fees. And it taught me something. Right? The people, the kind of neo-nihilists, ran a cartoon character for student body president who whipped my ass 2-1. The guy who drew the cartoon, though, was a buddy of mine, Sam Hurt. So Sam and I went out after 4 or 5 dozen beers, and the next day in the comic strip, I didn't do it, but it was Hank the Hallucination was the character. He was a hallucination that it was actually a law student. When he had 11 herbs and spices, he would see this hallucination. And Hank was walking down the street in this cartoon, and he startled a little girl named Peaches, and Peaches went, bang! Well, an imaginary gun is going to kill an imaginary character every day. And so poor Hank fell over dead. They counted the votes of a human being. I got to be student body president. I tell you all that because Hank's slogan has informed my whole career. It was, be real. A perfect slogan for hallucination. So we got in and we said, boys and girls, we better do something that's real. So I'm so proud of this. My now wife, then girlfriend, created the first student child care center. 40 years later, the children of the children who were there are going to that child care center. It's still there. She created the recycling program, which in the early 80s had never been done. It's still there. The thing I'm proudest of is I created a program called SURE, Students United for Rape Elimination. Sexual assault was a real problem in the early 80s. Yeah. It is today. Nobody talked about it. Nobody did anything about it. So we organized the campus to take care of our own, right? And that's still there too. And in fact, my son went to University of Texas, and now they have golf carts taking women safely home. And he wanted to publicize it. My boy is a lot smarter than I am. So you know what he did? He got Matthew McConaughey to drive one. And he put a little camera in there, and he sent it to Stephanopoulos at Good Morning America. He said, look, we got a movie star driving our folks home to prevent rape. I say all that because that taught me that in politics, you can make a difference in people's lives. Mm-hmm. And that's the most important. And, by the way, you can do things that will last. So that's kind of how I got into it. That's why it became so exciting to me. That's why I decided to make it my career.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And just one follow-up, because of where we are, we have lawyers here, law students. Michael, I think you alluded to this. Do you each claim your identity as lawyers with pride? And has it been a help or a hindrance? And in what ways in the political arena?
It's been enormous help. I'm very proud of it. I never practiced a day. My dean, Mark Udoff, who is still one of my dear friends and mentors, he went on to be the chancellor at the California system and Minnesota and Texas. He was really accomplished. He used to say, and he still reminds me of this, he used to say, if you want to hide something from Begala, put it in a law book. He will never find it there. So I knew I didn't want to practice, but I was telling Jason this, I took all the First Amendment philosophy, the theory that I could. And you still had to take wills and estates and oil and gas and tax and all the hard stuff. But I loved it, and I feel like I used it every day. It is very, very rigorous. Much more than my undergraduate liberal arts education, honestly. I sort of coasted through that. It was hard. It was good for my brain. It taught me how to analyze. It taught me how to process. It taught me how to advocate. And it taught me how to see both sides. The dean was just saying this. This is a hugely important part of your training, right, is to be able to see both sides and to listen and honor and respect both sides. So I think it's helped me every single day. I've never practiced a day. I would never hire me to be a lawyer, but the fact that I'm educated as one, I think it helped me every day of my life.
I did a slightly different course than Paul. I did law school at Georgetown at night, so I had a full-time job during the day and would go to law school at night. So I had an appreciation of that combo meal of, obligations, because I had been married at that point about a year or so when I started law school. My wife became pregnant with our first child my first year. Don't do that. So, I had a very different appreciation of what I was doing because it related back to my family that I was just starting, my community. So that combo for me was very, very important in sort of helping me grind and ground myself through law school. Yeah. Because in the night program at Georgetown, you have an extra year. You do it in 4 years instead of 3, so you've got that extra year. In my 4th year, my second son was born. Don't do that either.
We are a long way from the Augustinians.
Yeah, we are a long way from the Augustinians at this point. Very long trail, very long trail. But after law school, I did practice. I went into practice at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steele, and Hamilton in the Washington office. And because I wanted to get the feel of it and to begin to understand how to best utilize the deal, right? And the thing that I think a lot of the students come to appreciate over time, particularly as you get to your last year, is the utilitarian nature of this degree. Mm-hmm. Even if you're going into litigation, which I didn't want to do, I was a corporate guy, corporate finance. It was an appreciation of no matter what else I did in life, there are aspects of what I'm learning here, and Paul just ticked off some of those skill sets: critical thinking, analysis, speech, but most important, listening and understanding what you're hearing, being able to process that and respond in a way that is useful. All right, and so there. For me, I spent 7 years at Cleary and really learned a lot of the practice, the art, but also taking the teachings and the undergrad, the law school experience, translating that into a legal practice. You begin to decide, okay, what about this is for me and what about this isn't for me? And that's a difficult choice sometimes for a law student to make, to confront that reality. A lot of people go to these big firms and they think they're happy and they realize they're not. And you know what they wind up doing? They wind up becoming like a lot of other folks that we know are something else. There are a lot of lawyers that are now something else. And it's a matter of just kind of figuring out that part of your journey. I'm very proud of that experience and what I learned at Georgetown. I was a paralegal in a number of firms in Washington, D.C. Before going into law school, so I had a lot of reinforcements about the practice of law that I began to appreciate probably much more into my practice of law than I did at that time as a student or as a paralegal. And I'm very grateful for that. And look, you're at one of the top institutions here. I mean, this is no walk in the park, as you know, but it will translate beautifully for you. When you leave this institution, you're going to take some skill sets with you you didn't realize you were taught, you didn't realize you actually could do, or that you had. And that's the wonderful surprise of a legal training, that you find yourself at a cafe or a friend's place or conversation at dinner, and all of a sudden someone goes, "You sound a lot like a lawyer." You go, "Yeah, I do." And so you realize how that kind of comes out and manifests itself later on.
Well, maybe in the spirit of being open to things and analyzing things, let's talk a little bit about this election. And in particular, Michael, I'm going to come back to you before we get into some of the particulars here. You were once chair of the Republican Party. In 2010, you wrote a book called Right Now, a 12-step program for defeating the Obama agenda.
Yep.
But you have made no bones about it. In this race, you support Kamala Harris.
Yes, as I supported Biden in 20.
Okay,
Right.
so are you still a Republican?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you still welcome at Republican picnics?
No, absolutely not.
That's a great question.
I am a Republican because it pisses them off.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that I was here first. I've been a Republican since 1976. I made a conscious choice to join a party that was an anathema to many of my friends and family members who did not appreciate that I was a Republican. But my mother told me as a young man when I was at that age to make this kind of decision. She said, "Don't be a Democrat because we're Democrats. Go out and find out for yourself why you want to be what you are, and work through that." She taught me to be a leader, not a follower, when it comes to things that matter to me. And too many people follow other people on things that matter to them. So that's not them. They're not being true. And we can get into that conversation because there's so many examples today of that. But I did. I made that choice. I discovered that the Republican Party is the political home for African Americans. This is where we found our political legs, our political voice, and began to become a part of the political leadership of this country. First black members of Congress, first black senators, first black governors were all Republicans. Coming out of Reconstruction and growing into Jim Crow. And up until the 1930s, this was the place that fought for, advocated for the civil rights of all citizens. The party was founded on a fundamental principle, individual liberties and rights. That's why they broke with the Whigs, because the Whigs were compromising on a fundamental principle that as an American citizen, as someone on this soil, that we have individual liberties and rights that are protected by the Constitution. And the party fought for that and stood for that. And so I was animated by that thinking of Abraham Lincoln and knowing that guys like Frederick Douglass influenced him in his thinking and in the formation of this party and its process and progress over time. And there's some great speeches from Douglass and others about republicanism, and that informed me. And so when I told my mother that I'd made the choice to become a Republican, she looked at me and go, "Why did you do that? Like, what's your problem?" But so for me, that's an important value for me. I cannot compromise that. People say, "Well, why don't you just become a Democrat?" I said, because that's not my value. I love my friend here as a Democrat, and he has values and principles that drew him into his party as much as I have the same that drew me into mine. And I would no more expect Paul to give that up to be a Republican than I think, and I know he wouldn't expect me to do the same. So those things matter. And when they stop mattering, that's what pissed me off. And I watched people in my party who were principled individuals literally shred themselves. And I asked them, for what? And I ask now, for what? Because we're not anchored in that idea
Right.
that every person in this room matters, and we are the defenders against government intrusion into the things that matter to you. And the rights as outlined in our Constitution are fundamental, plenary. They're inalienable. And as a party, we should always defend and protect that. And so that's where I am, and it really ticks off a lot of people.
So I want to come back to that in a minute and talk a little bit more about the state of the party, but also the Democratic Party. But I wanted to get that out in the open a little bit because we're going to talk now about the election, and so people are clear.
So you know where I stand.
Yeah,
Well, can I
exactly.
just note what it says about the Republican Party? That I'm sitting with the Republican National Committee chairman who won the biggest midterm in the history of the country, 2010. 6 Senate seats, 63 House seats, 1,000 state legislative seats, and he's not welcome. Okay, it's like Texas A&M football. They find a play that works, and they never run it again. Thank God. I'm sorry, but political parties should exist to win.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party no longer exists to advance a set of ideas they think will help the country the way Michael does. They exist to be a cult of personality around. I haven't voted yet, but I'm getting to where I don't think I can vote for Trump. But he seems to be a personality
Right.
that is a little off-putting for a lot of people. Why you'd have a cult of personality built around his personality is beyond me.
Right.
Well, let me come back to that in 1 minute. I think there are a couple of questions there that'll be important. I want to maybe in that spirit too, a little bit of research to kind of ground the next part of our conversation. A Pew Research poll that was taken last year. When asked to describe their feelings about politics, the one word that came up most frequently from those who were polled was divisive. Ipsos earlier this year in a poll said 81% of Americans say that America is more divided than united. Across the two polls, 2/3 of the people say that members of the political system and pundits increase that division. And 2/3 of the people say they always feel exhausted when thinking about politics. That's a lot of people. Now, here's the paradox, though, that I'd like you to comment on. Nevertheless, 2018, 2020, 2022 were three of the highest turnout elections in the history of the country by percentage. How do you reconcile those numbers with that amount of activity politically?
When people are agitated, they vote.
They vote. That's it.
I mean, I'm all for negative campaigning. I love negative campaigning.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
If it's fair, factual about public issues that affect your life.
That's it.
Okay, those are my ethical. Boy, you can say a lot within those guardrails. Okay, fair, factual about the public record. I love it. You know, when I was for Hillary in the primaries against Barack Obama, and he won, and Hillary called me in and said, I'm going to be all in for this guy. I want you to endorse him and give him a check. And get Carville to do it, too. I was like, you talk to Carville.
You're not having
She
that
said, no,
conversation.
that's your job, dear. And I said, yes, ma'am. So I wrote him a check, and I went to the fundraiser, and my worry about him then, keep in mind he had been this skinny state senator.
Trump, not Carville.
Obama.
Obama, okay.
Right.
Oh, I'd met Obama when he was a state senator, and I was impressed, but I was for my friend, you know, Hillary's family. And I was worried whether he'd be tough enough. This is at the beginning, to take on these evil, tough Republicans. So I wrote him a check, I gave it to him a fundraiser, and I wrote in the notation for negative ads only. And he laughed. He said, you'll be happier than you think with my campaign. And I was, because it was about ideas, right? So I'm all for that. But we've now changed from I'm right, you're wrong,
Right.
to I'm good, you're evil. Mm-hmm. To see, we could compromise. If you think taxes should be lower and I think they should be higher, we can find a way. But if I think I'm virtuous and I have a monopoly on virtue and you're evil, I think that's what's really changed. I think that's what people find exhausting. I mean, I've had more people come up to me and say, I can't talk to my daughter anymore. She's for Kamala. That's always a tell, by the way. The most famous woman in the world, you can't get her name right. That's heartbreaking, you know, and that's, I think, has been the change in the last 10 years.
Well, let me push back just a little bit on that, Paul, just for a minute. And Michael, I think you can comment on this too.
Yeah.
You were both tough political operators. Mm-hmm. You just said, you know, you love a good negative ad. But you also said it's about ideas.
Right.
Do you, in looking back, do you regret anything in any of the campaigns that you were part of? Any tactics that you used?
No.
Viewed today through the eyes of polarization?
No. Sorry. No, I regret lots of things I've done, but not those. We ran around the country and said we thought old man Bush was the right man for the time, but the times had passed him by, and the Cold War was over, and we needed a new generation of leader, and we were right. I have no regrets about that, honestly. He was a fine man. I wound up friends with him. It's a long story, but he actually, one of my brothers worked for him for years and years and years and years. And after the election, he said that to me. He said, we call Chris the good Begala. And this is when his son was president. I said, Mr. President, that's right, but I call you the good Bush. So, love the sinner, hate the sin. We didn't run a single personal ad attacking Bush. He was a really good man. We didn't run a single personal ad attacking Romney. He's a good man. But he had ideas and in Romney's case, business deals that we thought were politically smelly. And they weren't unethical. They weren't, but they were just things, the kind of thing to make you lose a race. So, no, I don't have regrets about that stuff because I don't go there. I mean,
Michael.
So on the Republican side, it's a little bit different because we did the Willie Horton ad.
So 1988,
right?
An ad in that race that was run against Michael Dukakis,
right? That
portrayed him as weak on crime.
Weak on crime, but the way you framed that ad. Now, I had nothing. I was not involved in that part of the campaign, and I wasn't even involved in that campaign at that point. But my point is, this is an example of what Paul is talking about, the difference between running an ad that says a candidate is soft on crime, that they're much more willing to do these things that we think could be more harmful to the community, versus running an ad that strikes fear in white people. Because that's what Willie Horton was about. It was to make white suburbanites afraid. That is bad advertising. That's ugly negative campaigning that is detrimental to the conversation and the political discourse. Because now I'm not getting you to think critically about whether or not his policy on guns versus my policy on guns, his policy on parole and bail versus my policy on parole and bail, his policy on police and policing versus my policy on police and policing are different. And you can sit there and go, well, I like this makes sense, I don't know how I feel about that. My ad versus his ad is, you should be afraid of black criminals. Because that's the image I've just put in front of you. Mm-hmm. A black man released from jail who kills somebody. And God help him if he killed somebody white. And we see that now playing out with what Republicans are doing in their advertising with respect to immigrants. These young white women would be alive but for these illegal immigrants being here. Mm-hmm. And so when you layer up advertising in front of the community that way, then you're going to get that response in your polling where people hate the process and they hate what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And the reaction at the ballot box is a response to that, which unfortunately for my party, they have not learned from. Because the 18, 20, and 22 campaigns should have told them we are on a bad footing here. That voters are hearing what we're saying. When in 20, when Donald Trump is out there saying, well, they're coming to suburbia. They're building Section 8 housing in suburbia. What the hell do you think he's talking about? What do you think he's saying? In 2018, when they're saying, oh, there are caravans coming up into Iowa and New Hampshire, and caravans of what? Of who? What do you think he's saying? So that kind of advertising is at once subtle, right? I mean, it's not overt. It's not saying, oh, black and brown people, be very afraid, be very, very afraid. I mean, right now, I just today tweeted out a quote from Donald Trump from a Pennsylvania rally where he said that, they're cheating, they're stealing the election, they're out of control. They're out of control in Philadelphia. They're out of control in Detroit. Mm-hmm. They're out of control in Atlanta. Who lives in Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Detroit? Mm-hmm. Come on, people. So that's part one of it. Yep. The part two is when we, you, me, put blinders on and ignore what we just read from a man who wants to be president of the United States and make excuses for what we're hearing. Because you know what? There's a little something in you that agrees with it. Who thinks that Atlanta, Detroit, and Philadelphia, the African Americans live there, are out of control. And we need somebody to control them. And that's what the negative advertising does. It pulls out of you the very thing, that ugly side of you, instead of that side of you that sees in the main that this country needs to move forward. Why? Because it is browning. It is changing. It is not the same as it was in 1900 or in 1876 or 1776.
Right. Let me follow up on that just for a second. So you mentioned, I think quite accurately earlier, once upon a time, the Democratic Party was the party of Jim Crow, at least a substantial wing of it in the South. It was a segregationist party.
Right.
Now
we seem to think that's the place to be. I have no idea why, but yeah.
But I guess my question is, does that demonstrate, and what we're seeing with ads today, not just ads about African Americans, but ads about other people of color and immigrants, what does that tell both of you about the nature of racism in the American experience and in American politics? Yeah. Is it a virus that simply spreads and realigns with parties?
It's our original sin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be so religious, but we're both people of faith. It's America's original sin. And it's not America's, it's human nature. I believe this, okay? 50,000 years ago, you're in your tribe, and you're on the plains or in the forest or in the desert or in the mountains or wherever you are, and somebody who looks really different comes into your camp, very good idea to kill him. Quick, kill him. He's different. He's a threat. He might rape your women. He might steal your goats. He's a threat. He's different. That's our biological evolution. That's your amygdala saying, fear the other. Okay, but then that's 50,000 years ago. You're going to have about 5,000 years ago? Every decent religion, the Judeo-Christian ethic, the Islamic ethic, the Hindu ethic, the Confucian ethic, the Buddhist ethic, every decent philosophy, the one thing they all have in common is this notion to treat other people well, especially if they're different from you.
The stranger.
That's the reason they all have that thread is because they know us. And I'm sorry, it's in me, and I think it's in you. This point you're making, we have this amygdala, and it says fear the other. Fear the other. So it's very, very effective. It's very effective. And this negative identification is the quickest way to form a community. I won't do it now, but if you call only one of my 4 sons went to the University of Texas, sadly. The other went to UVA and William & Mary and James Madison. If you call any of my boys, all in their 20s now, and ask them, what time is it? I swear to you, they'll say, Daddy, it's 12:51 and OU sucks. Why? Because Oklahoma sucks.
I've been there, and he's done that.
We've done this. I've called my kids.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
It's basic science. It is. Texas would break off and float in the Gulf of Mexico if Oklahoma didn't suck. And I say that in partial amusement because that's the easiest way to form a community. You're at the University of Texas. It's like your school, any school. It's wonderfully diverse. I mean, every country in the world, every religion. So you want to unify those kids at UT, you tell them, OU sucks. Right? It's cheap. It's cheap, but it's the quickest way to form a community is to hate the other. So I save that for the most important thing in my life, which is college football. I don't let it infect my politics.
Right.
In that, I try to follow my faith, which is love the sinner, hate the sin. I disagree with you on taxes, but I love you. Mm-hmm. That's a very different thing than kill him, he looks different from me. But that's in all of us, and it is a special sin. I'm sorry to use that word. It's a special evil tactic to use that in a multiracial, multicultural democracy, because this thing could come apart really easily.
Tribal.
It's tribal.
Yes.
And can I just real quick connect a couple of dots to what Paul is saying? Because, so you referenced the book I wrote, and it's the only book I ever wrote for a lot of reasons. But I became chairman of the Republican Party at a time that was coming off of a real shellacking by Democrats in 2006. I was on the ballot for the U.S. Senate in 2006 from Maryland, and I know very well and still have some of the splinters that were administered by Democrats in that election. 2008, we lose the presidency to Barack Obama, John McCain, and an incredibly good public servant, God rest him, who was one of the best standard bearers we had since Reagan to be our nominee. And again, history, when you run against history, folks, it's a hard day in politics. And we lose to Barack Obama. So the party was dispirited and bereft of ideas and focus and direction. And so what I wanted to do coming in as national chairman was to reanimate that principle again, because the book is really, it's not so much, it's like, there's no haranguing of Barack Obama. I knew the senator from back when I was lieutenant governor. He'd just come to Washington as a U.S. senator. So it was nothing personal. It's like, okay, he has these ideas. He has a cap and trade policy. Hello, we got an issue. He's got a healthcare policy. Oh, we got a big issue. And sort of responded to his policy prescriptions in the book. But the way I wanted to do it was to reground the party in its tradition, reground the party in its history and its philosophy around why we say government has a role, but it is a limited role. Government has a purpose, but it is a limited purpose. That at the end of the day is the individual that's going to chart the future of the course of the country, because the government, as the founder said, is the people. So that was the basis of the book. And then what happened over time was literally like 5 years between 2009 and 2014, there was this transition into a reality. And it actually had begun back in the Bush years, where some inside the party began to realize they could capitalize on the ugly. If I send you a hair on fire email and ask for $5, right, you send me 10. Oh, really? And there began this journey that we're on, where your anger has value to the party. The more pissed you are, the more you pay. That's how they raise their money. Don't believe me, just watch. Listen to candidates running for office who say, I just stood on the floor and I did this. Right. Send me $10. Or Paul Begala is a rat's patootie. Send me $10. And there's a growing segment of our population.
Could be true, by the way.
Could be true.
Truth of defense, isn't it?
And they respond to that. So when Paul talks about the negative ads back in the day, that didn't translate into this quid pro quo. I'm going to feed that part of your amygdala that really, have you fear others and be concerned, but then have this reflexive response of sending in cash. So when you level up the grift, that translates into control. This is what we get. This is where we are. And it is interesting philosophically to watch the Democrats this is the way I put it. Paul may not agree with this, but the Democrats today are the Republicans of the 1980s. In other words, in how they talk about the country, right? Ronald Reagan, shining city on the hill, defending our values and our virtues around the globe, standing with our allies, the evil empire, Russia, the Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan was not dancing with Gorbachev, right? He was not on the phone 7 times talking and cutting deals. So it's an interesting philosophical shift as we're watching these political underpinnings play to the worst fears of the American electorate.
Yeah.
And it's in that context that we think a little bit about where we are in this race. So, close race, obviously. Recent national polling of registered voters from NBC shows a dead heat between Harris and Trump. Other polls of likely voters maybe show a slight lead for Harris. Swing state polls are divided, but definitely within the margin of error in all these key states. Let's talk a little bit about how each candidate is running the race right now. Paul, for Vice President Harris, she went on Fox News yesterday. Was that a good move? And how does that fit into the frame of whether she's communicating enough and enough on policy and enough in the places that she needs to at this point in the race?
You know, she's only been a presidential candidate about 89 days. That's astonishing.
And a fact on that. So Barack Obama, from the time he declared to November of 2008, had 633 days. George Bush had 512 from the time he announced until general election night. Joe Biden had 558. Harris will have about 107.
Well, you left the other guy out. Donald Trump has 9 years and 6 months as a presidential candidate. I'm not kidding.
That's true.
Since he slithered down that escalator at Trump Tower, 9.5 years. So one of my laws about running campaigns, and I'm sure Michael saw this with all the races he ran, politicians make 75% of their mistakes in the first 25% of their campaign.
Yep.
It's probably like a new job or anything else, right? This woman has been thrown into the harshest spotlight in the world, and she hadn't put a foot wrong yet. Okay? I mean, I've been astonished. I'm glad she went on Fox News. She showed a lot of strength. I thought Bret Baier disgraced himself. But again, I'm not a Fox guy. But she is trying to do two things at once, which is what you have to do in the closing days. Fire up your base and reach out to voters you do not yet have. The key to doing that is web issues, not wedge issues that divide. You need something that's going to make a young guy, a young black guy in Detroit decide to get up off a sofa and vote, and make an older white woman in Western Pennsylvania think, well, okay, she's not that crazy. That's a hard thing to do at once. Mr. Trump only cares about his base, but I want to give you some data. Donald Trump was found liable in a court of law for sexually abusing and defaming E. Jean Carroll. A week later, he had gained 0.9 of a point in the polls. He was convicted of 34 felonies. He lost not a single point in the polls. He basically stood there while Joe Biden collapsed in the debate, and Biden's polling collapsed too, but Trump only gained 1 point in his own vote.
Right.
He got shot at. Thank God he survived. Got shot at in Pennsylvania. He gained 1.2 points. Reagan got shot. He gained 30. Guy gained 1.2 for surviving an assassination attempt. My heart, I mean, again, I'm probably not going to vote for Trump, but my heart went out to him. I mean, I literally prayed for the man. He had a perfectly successful convention the way he wanted. He gained 1.1%. Then Kamala gets in the race. And the day Kamala got in the race, he was at 44. Today, he's at 46.1. Okay, nothing moves him. Nothing moves him up. Nothing moves him down. He had a terrible debate. There's another assassination attempt. Nothing moved. Bobby Kennedy endorsed him. Nothing moved. Poor Bobby. No, I used to know him. He had a brain-eating worm in his brain, and the worm died of starvation. There weren't enough food in there. But that didn't help. He uncovered the scandal of Ohioans eating each other's cats. I've been to Ohio. The food is terrible. Cats might be an improvement. Nobody even noticed this. This is my favorite because this is so batty. It's what the press does. We call it sane washing. Trump published a book, one of his many enterprises. He's got a coffee table book of pictures of the dear leader. Well, that's fine. I got a lot of family and friends who are for Trump. I'm sure they bought the book. And he personally wrote the cut line under each of these pictures of the dear leader. There's a picture of him with Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. And it says, here I am with Justin Trudeau, the bastard son of Fidel Castro. What? He says, yes, Castro was actually the biological father of Trudeau because Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, had been PM, and he had no hair. And Justin has this beautiful head of hair. Therefore, Castro, who had great hair,
Yeah, there you go.
must have gotten Margaret Trudeau pregnant.
Very much.
Now, nobody even picked up on that. Like,
Wait a minute,
your
wait a
Uncle George did that, you'd put him in a home.
Steele is the biology guy. Let's leave that stuff to
My
him.
point is, none of this moves his vote a lick. Not a lick. And he got 45.9 against Hillary. He got 46.9 against Joe. That's it. 1 point movement after 4 years of president. Some love him, some hate him. But he trades in the most narrow range. That means what Kamala has to do is assemble the 53 that cannot possibly support this guy. Doesn't mean she'll do it. But there's 53% of the country. Donald Trump, for 9 years and 6 months, you know how many days he's been at or above 50 in the polls? 0. For a decade. It's unprecedented. For a decade, he has never one day commanded the majority support of the American people. So it is hers to win, but it's still a coin toss right now.
But of course, in the current environment, with some of the lesser parties, he doesn't need to draw 50.
That's right.
Correct?
That's exactly right.
And the
Exactly
flip side of that coin is you revealed a lot of things. I have a list of many things. All these things would have been terminal for any other candidate at any other time, going back to the insult of John McCain back in 2015. It has not been.
Right.
You have talked in the past, I think, about your own surprise at that. But the point is that his numbers don't go down either. And
Never.
what that tells me is that there's 44, 45% of the country that is with Donald Trump. Michael, I know you've thought a lot about this because it's part of your party. Why is that? What is it? Is it economics? Is it
No.
border issues?
No.
Is it tribal? What? I mean, that is a substantial number of people. And by the way, to Paul's point, many of them are former Democrats,
Right.
blue-collar workers.
So that's where you start. So in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was able to amass a coalition of voters that was an unprecedented coalition, a combination, cross-partisan Democrat, Republicans, and independents. We're all familiar with Reagan Democrats. And they...
Just so folks are clear, so the Reagan Democrats were people who had voted for Democrats in the past, and many of them in suburban areas, and then they crossed over.
In 1980 and in a massive way in 84.
I grew up in a place that was filled with Reagan Democrats.
Exactly. And the 84 election, it was just one for the books. The president only lost one state. And so it was an amazing combination. At the end of the Reagan era in January of 1989, as his vice president was becoming president, there was within the Republican Party the turmoil beginning of who would be the next Reagan. And that battle has yet to this day to be resolved. And it is part and parcel of the fight that's going to come. But what happened was in the 92 re-elect of George Bush, Bubba went back home. Those Reagan Democrats left the Republican Party and they returned to Bubba, Bill Clinton. And by 1996, they grew tired of Bill Clinton because Bill Clinton was too moderate. The DLC, the Democrat Leadership Committee, was too moderate for them. So they checked out. By 2000, they were done. And there they sat and sat and sat. And what were they doing while they were sitting? They were watching TV. And what were they watching? A man named Donald Trump every week fire people. The Apprentice.
So just to be clear, this is a group of voters, in your view, who were more conservative than centrist.
Yes, yeah.
They were sitting it out.
They were sitting out.
Because Bill Clinton was too centrist. That's a different issue than Bill Clinton being so centrist that Democrats.
Right. No, they went because they didn't like Bush. They didn't like the patrician sort of vibe from the Bushes. So they went with Bubba, with Bill Clinton in 92. A lot of reasons, economy, played a role. The Bush the Bushism of, I will not raise taxes, et cetera. All of those things just did not resonate with them. The promises of the party on matters related to abortion, control of the Supreme Court, the big government republicanism, that, Bush had 1,000 points of light and all this sort of squishy stuff they didn't like. So they sat out and they watched TV and they watched this man, Donald Trump, be strong, be, concise and showing leadership. He had beauty pageants, so he's surrounded by beautiful women. And, so he's page 6 of the New York Post there, he's part of the gossip community in New York. And he's building these big skyscrapers and his names are on it. And everybody's going, man, he's got bling. He's hanging out with rappers, right? In the 80s, despite what he's saying about killing 5 innocent young black boys. But that's another conversation. No one's paying attention to that. What they're liking is the entertainment. They're being entertained. 2015 comes along, Donald Trump, and I had this conversation with him in 2013 in Trump Tower when he asked me up to sort of get a feel for the Republican Party. And the one thing I remember as I went into that meeting was something Donald Trump said on tape back in the 1980s, was that if he ever ran for president, he would probably run as a Republican because it would be easier. And so I have that meeting, have that conversation, and that was what it was. 2 years later, he is announcing he's making plans to run for president. 2016, he announces, comes down the escalator, and the first thing out of his mouth was Mexicans are rapists and murderers. The party had a platform, a document that said that it wanted to build a relationship with the Hispanic community. It was their autopsy, an appropriate name for a party that was dying. And they sat there, the leadership of the party allowed this man to basically crap over that document by saying the Mexican people were rapists and murderers, and I'm going to build a wall to keep them out. And you wonder why that happened. And so I sat in on a focus group in August, September, and there was a white suburban mother of 2 divorced from New Hampshire when asked the question why she was supporting Donald Trump. You know what her answer was? Because he's just like me. Tell me what a white suburban mother of 2 from New Hampshire has in common with Donald Trump. And my proposition is, to this day, Jason, the media and the political class have not answered that question, which is why Donald Trump is where Donald Trump is at 46, 47%. Donald Trump in this election has one goal and one goal only. He knows what his ceiling is. He's at his ceiling. He's always been at his ceiling. So what does he have to do? He has to pull Kamala Harris, take her floor below his ceiling.
Right.
And that's what he's been doing to some degree of success.
Right.
Okay, and I want to jump in there. We're gonna get some audience questions that we asked for in advance. I'm also going to circle back a little bit with where you see this coming together. So I think this touches a little bit on.
Can I just put a cap on that real quick?
Yeah, put a cap
on what I just told you. The bottom line takeaway is Donald Trump did something no one else had ever done. He turned his viewers into his voters. And Bubba got off the couch in 2016 after sitting there since 2000 or more, and got engaged in the political process. And they got engaged in the political process because they saw a man who was just like them.
I want to come back to that too, but I think this plays into the question about the Republican Party that you're hitting on, a little bit about the Clinton experience. One person asked, I think, a very important question is, should we have a third party, a large third party? Michael, have you considered starting a party?
Absolutely.
Becoming your own party?
I've advocated, all 100%.
What would that do? And I'm going to ask just a little different version of that important question. Paul, on the Democratic Party side, one of the things you've said about Bill Clinton is one of his lasting contributions was when you worked on the 92 race, Democrats had lost 5 out of 6 presidential elections before that. And Clinton's virtue that Michael has hit on is moving the party back to the center so it could speak to the country nationally. Do you think that history needs to repeat itself? Has the Democratic Party become too left, or perceived as too left, too woke, as some would say, to be able to communicate to the center of the country, and therefore is asleep at the switch in a campaign against someone who it can fairly be stated is at least authoritarian interested? Third party first, and then the failings possibly of the Democratic
So I real quick on the third party. So yes, absolutely, 110,000% yes. Do you think I really want to, open up the process? Yes. When I was national chairman, I proposed that we abolish our primary system. That went over very well with New Hampshire and Iowa. Especially when I decided, well, since you don't want to abolish it, then how about we do a rotation and we mix it up so that other states go first. And my goal was, how do I engage you to vote and participate? How do I make my party more relevant to you in your daily lives, in the narratives that we are talking about, in the policies that we're leveling up? When I start an election for the presidency in one of the whitest states in the country, I'm not reflecting the country. And therefore, the conversation becomes stilted, and it becomes one-sided, and it becomes uneven, and it becomes dragged, in my view, dragged down by the political mess, ugliness, the tribalism, and the partisanship. And so my view was, let's open this up. I think our country, I think the presidential election should be a national holiday. You don't have to go to work that day because I need you to vote. I need you to participate. I think we move it from November. Why the hell are we doing it at a time when it's dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it's cold as hell outside and people are standing in long lines? So let's do it in the spring. Let's do it at another time of the year. We can work this out. We can send rockets to Mars. We can figure out when to hold an election. Why don't we open up the primary process, ranked choice voting? I'm a very strong supporter and advocate for the national popular vote, in which the states enter into a compact to agree to put their electoral college votes in a bucket, and the winner of the national popular vote, the person who gets the most votes, wins those 270 electoral votes. Imagine that. So yes, I'm about reforming the system because our system is now being dragged down by the system that we've allowed to stand up.
Paul, Democratic Party, third party, any other reforms?
Yeah, I'm for
possibilities.
I'm for everything Michael said except a third party, and I'm 200,000% against that. That is a guarantee that the 46% Trumpers, the authoritarian anti-democracy crypto-fascists, will rule this country for as long as there's a third party. Okay, the Democrats right now, Kamala Harris is holding together a coalition from AOC to Liz Cheney. You try doing that. Okay, that ain't easy. You give anybody a chance to peel off, they're going to peel off in my party. Okay, it's a really broad and diverse coalition held against what we believe is an existential threat to our republic, to our democracy, to our Constitution. Not just like Michael's wrong on taxes, okay? So, no, I've worked all around the world, and only in democracies. It turns out dictators don't need a campaign consultant. And I love and admire their systems. I do, and I've worked in them. But multi-party democracies often empower the fringes even more. I like having two big, lumbering, stupid parties who have to keep adapting. And again, I was born in.
But they're not adapting, Paul. That's the problem.
In my lifetime, the Democratic Party has gone from the party of segregation and lynching to the party of Barack Obama. So it takes a minute, but they can change. And right now, I don't want a third party. I want a second party. The Republican Party has become a cult of personality around authoritarianism. That's not a collection of ideas like Reagan. I actually went. You all should do this. I'm kind of a Reagan aficionado. I have scores of hours of interviews with his top aides. I was going to do a book on him. I never got around to writing it, but I have like lots and lots and lots of research on Reagan. And I went back this week, and you go look at this on the YouTubes. There was a debate in the 1980 Republican primaries for president in Houston, and a young man, fire in his eyes, angry, could have been right out of a MAGA rally, got up and said, I want you to tell me why the child of an illegal immigrant, an illegal alien, he called him, an illegal alien should be able to go to Houston public schools for free. Shouldn't the parents at least have to pay for that or kick that kid out of school? And go look at what Reagan and Bush said about that. Okay, it would make your heart warm if you're a liberal. They gave the most passionate. So that was when it was a collection of ideas. For the Democrats, yeah, they do have to be in the center. This country is best won and governed from the middle. And there are times, believe me, when my party, if Kamala Harris loses this 2024 election, she will have lost it in 2019 when she ran appealing to the farthest fringes of the left. She's not doing that now.
Do you think the selection of Tim Walz as the vice presidential candidate was because of a fear of backlash?
No.
Of selecting Josh Shapiro?
No, I think it was chemistry. I happen to know her interview with Shapiro was terrible. They didn't like each other. And she's like, I'm not going to spend 4 years with this guy. And he was like, I'm not spending 4 years with this chick. Okay, it was just, at least people who, I wasn't there, but no. First off, the first vice president said this, John Adams, in this job, I am nothing, but I could be everything. Okay, and right now we're in the nothing stage. But when I was working for President Obama's reelection, Governor Romney picked Paul Ryan.
Right.
Okay, my wife's from Baraboo, Wisconsin, right by his district. His district had a lot more Democrats in it than people think.
Yep.
And this guy was beloved by the Democrats as well as the Republicans. He's young, he's handsome, he's brilliant, he gets Democratic votes. I thought, holy smokes, we're going to lose Wisconsin. Barack not only carried Wisconsin, he carried Paul's congressional district. Not because they didn't love Paul Ryan, they reelected him on the same day they voted for Obama. It's that the vice president never drives the vote. So the only reason to pick a vice president is because you think, God forbid, they should step in. Clinton literally said that to me when he picked Al Gore. I was campaigning hard for Harris Wofford to be on the ticket with him. Harris was a perfect match, right? Clinton was younger, Harris was older. Clinton was moderate, Harris was liberal. Clinton was a new Democrat. Harris Wofford had worked for Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy.
He was a senator from Pennsylvania.
Senator,
at the time,
Clinton was
that you would help get elected in Pennsylvania.
That was the most important qualification. He was my client. So I'm pushing Harris, and Clinton interviewed him and liked him, whatever. And Harris had been out there stumping for him in the primaries, busting his tail. In comes Gore. It was alone, just two men in the room. Out walks Gore. I go in. The governor, how'd it go? I'm picking him. Whoa, no, come on. What about Harris? He's out there busting his ass. I was so impressed with Al, and I cut him off again. I was like, Governor, he hadn't even endorsed you. He's like, I believe if I pick him, he will. I was like, okay, fair point. But what does he bring? There's no balance. He's the same age. He's the same religion. He's from the same region. He's the same ideology. And you know what Clinton said? Paulie, I might die. I thought, oh, crap. That's how you pick your VP. I really believe that. I believe that Vice President Harris got in the room and said, God forbid something happens. I like this guy. This guy has my values. He could stand in there. That's certainly why Bush picked Cheney. I mean, I'm not a Bush supporter, but George W. Bush didn't need Wyoming's 3 electoral votes or Dick Cheney's animal magnetism. I think he just thought, God forbid something happens, this guy can do it, right?
The same is true with Obama and Biden was, you know, it's interesting that you say that, though, about the whole age thing between Clinton and Wofford was you now see that seems to be the model, that the younger presidential candidate is picking the older vice presidential candidate to run with them.
All right, the last audience question we have, and I'm going to roll one other thing, and it's a basic question that I'm sure people here are interested in. We're going to answer these in 2 minutes.
Okay.
What's going to happen in this election? Who's going to win, in your view? And I would like to add to that, what can people here take out of this that they can do, that they should feel, that despite the divisiveness that we might have, that there is hope for us to be able to come together? And I'm going to ask each of you to give me a minute on both of those questions together. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask. But then again, you put in my head the idea of Dick Cheney's magnetism.
Well,
there you go.
He's a charismatic dude.
There you go.
Okay, first, this is just guesswork. Nobody knows. If anybody tells you they know, they're full of baloney. The House is more likely than not to go Democratic. Flip. The Senate is more likely than not to go Republican. By the way, in 8 out of the 10 elections since the Cold War ended, the House or the Senate or the White House has flipped. We're really in churn right now. So I believe each will flip to the party opposite. It's a coin toss for the presidency. That said, I'd much rather be Kamala than Trump for the reasons that I stated. She has capacity to grow. She's got to do her job, and she's, I think, doing quite well. So I honestly believe, not just my desire, the better bet is that Kamala will win this thing. So what can you do? Well, first, obviously, vote, volunteer, knock doors, write cards, do this relational peer-to-peer organizing that David Plouffe really kind of invented for Obama and is bringing into Kamala's. There are your websites you can go to. It uploads your contacts, matches it against the voter file, and it'll tell you which of your friends have not voted. Gosh, I wish I remember the name of it. I'm a terrible political consultant. But then there's something else, which is more important, I think, as a citizen. Get off social media. Social media is incompatible with democracy. One will live and one will die. I was on Twitter. I had 370,000 followers. I was 100 times a day texting, and it made me a terrible person. Made me stupid, hateful, glib, thoughtless, and I literally quit. And I was never on any others. The other thing, second, I'm not kidding. We won't survive when people getting their information from social media.
You have said we're prisoners of algorithms.
Yes, because we used to go on the internet to seek information. You know, how'd the Astros do last night? Okay, now we go on to receive information that billionaires with neuroscientists weaponizing your amygdala against you, feeding you the dishonest, the divisive, all this stuff we talked about, like some guys coming into your tribe to kill you. So honestly, get off social media. The other thing is turn off all the notifications, all of them. The only notifications I have are from the airlines and the ride shares, because I need to know if my plane's late or if my car's here. But I don't get notifications from CNN, even though they pay me. I don't get CNN. I don't get even Longhorn football. It turns out you can keep up real well, just kind of on your own, living your life without them demanding your attention. I'm serious. If I sound apocalyptic, I'm understating it. It's going to kill us all. And so I mean it. So what you do in replace of that, get out of your comfort zone. I'm a liberal. I look at conservative media. I need it. I have to know. I do 2 things every day. I read the Holy Bible and I watch Fox News because I want to know what both sides are thinking.
I'm going to leave that there.
Yeah, right.
I believe in good and evil.
Time. Michael.
So,
Paul, thank you. Mike, vote whoever you're voting for.
Yeah.
Right.
Get off social media. Get out of your comfort zone. Michael, what's going to happen and your recommendation?
So, like Paul, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm a much more of a risk taker. I have always been a risk taker in politics, starting out as an African-American, conservative, Roman Catholic Republican in D.C. Just no more risky than that. So I look at a lot of various things, and it's part of how I kind of cobbled together the 2020-10 cycle against a lot of folks inside the party who told me it would never happen. I remember Karl Rove writing in the Wall Street Journal, the chairman doesn't know what he's talking about. We'll be lucky if we win 39 seats this fall. I'm like, okay. 63 seats later. So here's my thing. Kamala Harris will be the next president of the United States. For the first time, white suburban women will not turn their backs on the female candidate as they did in 2016 and in 2020. So there's that. I think that the Senate, again, I'm a little bit more aggressive here. I think the Democrats have a play to hold the Senate, narrowly, but hold it. And the reason that is that there are issues that are not being baked into the polling. Abortion, cannabis, and a number of other issues that are on the ballots in some of the battleground states that are going to drive voters who otherwise would not necessarily come out. They're now coming out. Voter registration advantage, Democrats have done an incredibly good job at voter registration. I give you what happened when Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris. 400,000 people registered in one night. Republicans don't have anything close to that. Finally,
Kid Rock?
We have Kid Rock. We do have Kid Rock. Thank God for Kid Rock.
Sorry.
Finally, I'm going to leave you with 3 words because this is what has been your endowment, we the people. What happens on November 5th doesn't boil down to a poll, doesn't boil down to what the campaign did, where candidates showed up or didn't show up. It boils down to what kind of country you want. It's that simple, folks. Let's not overthink this. You want America that you want to raise your kids and your grandkids in, where they have political leadership that you can talk to them about? I remember having to turn off the car radio in my car during the Clinton years because of the whole Monica Lewinsky thing, and the news on the way in was talking about what was happening in the White House. And I was like, oh no, my kids, this is not the kind of leadership I want my kids to hear about. And that was in the 1990s. So here we are, and we're, to Paul's point about social media, there's a lot more going on that impacts our families and our communities. So we the people, you decide. You're ultimately going to decide what kind of country we are. We're either going to go with the guy who says he wants to be a dictator, or go with the woman who says, hey, I'm looking at an opportunity economy that includes everybody.
Thank you, Michael. And I want to thank both of our panelists. I want to thank all of you for being here. Let's give a hand to Paul and to Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And as we leave in the spirit of the law school, in the spirit of the Knox conversations, and hopefully in the spirit of our nation, you mentioned Abraham Lincoln earlier today. As Lincoln said, let us remember these words. Let us have a reverence for the Constitution and the laws, and that we improved to the last, and that we remained free to the last.
Amen.
Thanks very much.
Amen.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.